Hi, and welcome back to this Thursday edition of Focal Point on AFR Talk. We've been following, as many of you have, the primary season, major primary in North Carolina on Tuesday. Got another significant primary coming up in the state of Oregon. Want to give a special welcome to our listeners out in the state of Oregon who are listening to us. One of the candidates for the United States Senate in the state of Oregon is Jason Conger. He's locked in a GOP primary contest with Dr. Monica Waby, who is an orthopedic surgeon from the city of Portland. Our guest, Jason Conger, is on our decision maker line. Grew up in poverty, lived in the back of his father's truck for a while, worked hard, worked his way through junior college to State University, made his way to Harvard, graduated from Harvard Law School, supporting a growing family all the way along, was elected in the Tea Party surge to the House of Representatives in Oregon in 2010, now serving his second term. So he's gone from being homeless to Harvard to the Oregon House and now has his sights set on the United States Senate. Jason, Representative Conger, welcome to Focal Point with Brian Fisher.
Brian, thanks for having me.
Well, it's great to have you on. We always enjoy meeting candidates and hearing from folks. And, you know, you're in a contest right now where you've got an establishment candidate. Monica Waby's getting the support of the Karl Rove types, kind of the ruling class Republicans, the establishment Republicans. And one of the things that might help people making up their mind as they go to the polls there in Oregon is how you would differentiate yourself from your opponent in this race. In other words, when, you know, the issues that matter to our listening audience are going to have to do with the sanctity of life. They're going to have to do with the sanctity of marriage. They're going to have to do with the issue of immigration. So let's pick those three issues and have you just describe how you would compare your position on life, marriage, and immigration to your opponent in this primary.
Well, on those three issues, there are clear distinctions. I am pro-life and have always been very clear about that, both privately and publicly. And I am in favor of traditional marriage, which is in Oregon, there's, a 10-year-old amendment to the Constitution that passed by popular vote on a statewide ballot back in 2004. I'm sorry, I almost said 2010. In 2004, that says marriage is between a man and a woman, and I'm very supportive of that, and do not support the push for gay marriage, and my opponent, Dr. Waby, does. On immigration, it's a little less clear, and I don't want to misstate my opponent's position. I just have a little trouble understanding what it is. But I'm definitely for immigration reform. Clearly, we need to reform the law. Clearly, we can't even contemplate the idea of, kicking millions and millions of people out of the country abruptly. But I think, immigration reform has to start by making our border secure. So border enforcement, and then has to, amnesty is basically sending a message to people that don't worry about our laws. You don't have to obey them because we won't enforce them. So amnesty is not the right answer, but we do have to have some kind of work visa program or something that is more functional and allows people who are law-abiding to apply and get legal status, but not citizenship in the country.
One other question. Our listening audience would be very concerned or interested in a candidate's position on the Second Amendment. Where do you stand on the Second Amendment, your understanding of that?
Like with the rest of the Constitution, I'm very much a supporter, very much believe that the plain language and original intent approach to interpreting the Constitution is the right approach. So I support, again, the plain language of the Second Amendment, and support citizens' rights to keep and bear arms.
I want to go back and revisit a couple of these issues just to draw you out a little bit on the. Let me ask you one other question. There's I've followed what's going on in Oregon. I lived in Idaho for 29 years and followed what's happened in Oregon's forests with the spotted owl and that whole business, and I've seen one community after another. We've seen it in Idaho where where United States forest land has been taken out of timber production, off limits, no roads, no logging roads, no logging permitted. So these forests grow, they grow together. You get the buildup of fuel on the forest floor. Forest fire hits, the whole thing just goes up in flames, becomes completely non-productive. I mean, a tree is the ultimate renewable resource because you can grow another one. And a lot of the United States forests in Oregon have been taken out of circulation. So communities that were depending on timber revenue don't have it anymore. Sawmills are being shut down and their revenue is drying up, and then they're depending on the federal government, and then that source is starting to dry up. So what would you try to do as a senator from the state of Oregon to do something about that issue?
Well, this is actually one of the issues that helped motivate me to run for this office, for U.S. Senate. Federal forests comprise north of half of the forest land in Oregon, which is most of the state is forested. So it's an enormous amount of percentage of the land in the state, an enormous percentage of the forested land in the state, and it's particularly in some rural counties. It actually comprises north of 80% of the land base. And one thing that I think many people wouldn't realize, or wouldn't think of as intuitive, is that the federal government doesn't pay property tax. So if you think about a county in Oregon where 2/3 or 3/4 of the land is taken out of the tax base, and is taken out of the economy, essentially, for the most part, it creates a real problem to afford basic services like schools and law enforcement protection. And the legislature...
I remember, excuse me for interjecting here, Representative, but I remember one story out of Oregon where they had to let a bunch of people out of jail because they just didn't have enough money to keep them confined. They just ran out of money because the timber industry had been shut down in their communities. So devastating impacts.
Exactly. So they don't have people engaged in productive labor and paying income taxes and buying houses and engaging in commerce. And they don't have a tax base in terms of the property tax because the federal government doesn't pay any. And so, indeed, I think that was Josephine County, had to release a bunch of people from the jail because they simply didn't have the ability to keep them. And it gets worse. In that same county, there's a number of murders that have occurred over the last year, and they're just not being investigated because there's nobody to do it. If you can imagine the impact that has on people's sense of security, on their quality of life, and in fact, I was going to mention it. There was a 911 call that was played in 2013 in a committee on public safety in the Oregon legislature, and it was actually a call from a woman in Josephine County. And when she reached the 911 dispatcher, the dispatcher informed her that there was no law enforcement available to respond to her, and the nearest state trooper was 2 hours away. And this woman was calling because her ex-husband, who she had a restraining order against, was trying to break into the house with her and her 2 children. Ultimately, he did break in. There was no law enforcement to respond, and she was brutally beaten and raped by this man. Oh,
tragic story.
It is, and and again, it's motivated, or it's motivational to me, because the mismanagement of our forest has a human cost. I mean, it's not just trees being allowed to grow. It is harming people in rural Oregon in a very real way. And the solution is actually pretty simple. We just need to take better care of our forests. As you mentioned, right now they're overloaded. The fuel load from really probably 50, 60 years of pretty good firefighting has become enormous, and that makes the trees susceptible to insect infestation and disease, and ultimately much more likely to generate a catastrophic wildfire, which we're seeing over and over here in Oregon. That's a loss.
Our guest is Jason Conger, who is a candidate for the Senate from the state of Oregon, running against Monica Webby in the GOP primary coming up in a couple of weeks. And Representative Conger, he serves in the House of Representatives in the state of Oregon. Representative Conger, I want to cycle back just as we close. We got about a minute and a half left. Cycle back
Sure.
to the moral issues. We agree with George Washington. Religion and morality are indispensable supports of political prosperity. So let's go back to the life and marriage issue just to round out our conversation here. And let our listening audience know one more time about how you would separate yourself, how you would distinguish yourself from your opponent in this race, because it appears that there's a clear choice for the Republican voters in this primary on the issues of the sanctity of life and marriage.
Absolutely, Brian. Again, I'm pro-life. I've actually represent a very blue district and have been open about my values. My opponent she says she's personally pro-life, but doesn't believe it's the government's role. And so she is pro-choice in terms of being a legislator if she's elected. And on the issue of marriage, my opponent is for gay marriage, and I am not. I'm for traditional definitions of marriage for a lot of reasons. And I guess that's shown a little bit, as well as the point that you made about her being kind of an establishment candidate versus a real Oregon grassroots candidate, which is what I am, is illustrated in our endorsements. And I'm endorsed by Oregon Right to Life. I'm endorsed by the Oregon Firearms Federation, which is a Second Amendment, obviously, Second Amendment group. And she is not, and has more like, the Mitch McConnell endorsement and Mitt Romney endorsement.
Our guest has been Jason Conger. He's a candidate for the United States Senate running in the Republican primary in the state of Oregon. And the primary date, Jason, again?
It is May 20th.
May 20th.
This is a mail-in ballot state. So ballots are already out and votes are coming in.
So that's coming up right away. You can find out more information about Jason's candidacy by going to Conger, C-O-N-G-E-R, Conger for Oregon. That's F-O-R, CongerForOregon.com. Well, Representative Conger, thank you for taking time to be with us, and God's best to you as you move forward in public life. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Brian. Great to be with you.
Focal Point AFR Talk. We'll be right back with more. Don't go anywhere. Stay with us.